Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going all the way back to ancient Greece,
Yeah.
from its early beginnings to the rise of Alexander the Great.
Hey.
Our source material is this pretty hefty textbook, Traditions and Encounters,
Yeah.
a global perspective on the past.
It's a good one.
Yeah, and buckle up because we're going to cover a lot of ground here.
Uh-huh.
From the early Greeks and their epic clash with the Persian Empire to the spread of Greek culture across a vast empire. It's really fascinating to think about how much ancient Greece still influences us today.
It really is.
I mean, our politics, even our language, has roots in Greek thought.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Their ideas about democracy and philosophy and science and art, they're all still relevant today.
Yeah. So let's start with geography. How did the land itself shape the course of Greek history?
Well, Greece is a relatively small mountainous peninsula. That terrain made it really difficult to unify under a single ruler. So instead, it encouraged the development of these independent city-states. The Greek word for that is polis.
Place. Got it. So this had one big empire.
Mm.
We see a mosaic of smaller, independent powers.
Exactly.
Okay. So what are some of the key regions we should keep in mind as we're going through this deep dive?
Well, definitely the Peloponnesus. That's home to Sparta and Olympia. Then you have Attica, where Athens arose, Boeotia, known for the city of Thebes. And, of course, we can't forget Thessaly with its fertile plains that produced grain and horses.
Wow. So we've got our map. Now let's rewind the clock way back before those famous city-states to the mysterious Minoans.
Oh, yeah.
What can you tell us about them?
So the Minoans flourished on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age, long before the rise of mainland Greece. They built these magnificent palaces like the one at Knossos.
I've seen pictures. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's an architectural marvel with these intricate frescoes and complex layouts. But, the Minoans left us with a lot of unanswered questions.
Histories are always intriguing. What kind of
Very
questions
good.
are we talking about?
Well, for one, we still can't decipher their writing system, Linear A. It makes you wonder what secrets are locked away in those undeciphered texts.
Yeah.
And then there's the mystery of their sudden collapse around 1450 BCE.
What happened?
It's thought that a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Santorini might have been the cause.
Wow.
The destruction would have been widespread and led to major societal upheaval. There's even speculation that this catastrophic event could be the origin of the Atlantis legend.
A volcanic eruption wiping out a civilization. That's a dramatic way to go. Did anyone survive, or did the Minoans simply vanish?
Well, there's some evidence that the Mycenaeans, who were rising in power at that time, might have played a role in the Minoans' downfall.
Ah, so enter the Mycenaeans. They sound like a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, they were. The Mycenaeans were Indo-European people who established cities like Thebes, Athens, and of course Mycenae itself. Unlike the Minoans, we can actually understand their writing system, Linear B, an early form of Greek.
So we're starting to see the roots of the language we know today. What else set the Mycenaeans apart?
Well, they were powerful warriors and traders. Their society was structured around monarchies, and they had a vast commercial network spanning the Mediterranean.
Well,
And we can't forget about their connection to the legendary Trojan War, thought to have taken place around 1250 BCE.
okay.
It's believed to have been a conflict between the Mycenaeans and the city of Troy.
Right. It's amazing how those ancient stories still capture our imagination.
they do.
But like the Minoans before them, the Mycenaeans also experienced a collapse around 1190 BCE, right?
That's right. And the reasons for their downfall are still debated by historians.
So what happened after the Mycenaean world crumbled? Did Greece fall into chaos?
Well, Greece entered a period we call the Dark Age, a time of decline and upheaval that lasted from around 1100 to 750 BCE. It was a transition period as the Bronze Age gave way to the Iron Age population, societal complexity and trade all declined.
That sounds pretty bleak. Were there any glimmers of hope during this dark age?
Absolutely. Around 850 BCE, farming started to revive, and we see different Greek groups migrating and settling new areas. Perhaps most importantly, they adopted the Phoenician alphabet, which became the foundation for the Greek writing system we know today.
Wait, so the Greeks didn't create their alphabet from scratch? They borrowed it?
Yeah, they adapted the Phoenician system, adding vowels and refining it into that elegant script that would become so influential.
That's a great example of how cultures learn from each other. Now, how did the stories of the Mycenaean past survive this dark age? Did they just fade into myth and legend?
Well, that's where the epic poet Homer comes in. His works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are considered foundational texts of Western literature. They're thought to have originated during this Dark Age.
For those who need a refresher, can you remind us about the plots of these epic poems?
Of course, the Iliad tells the story of the Trojan War, focusing on the rage of Achilles and the consequences of his wrath. The Odyssey, on the other hand, follows the long and perilous journey home of Odysseus, another hero of the Trojan War. It showcases his cleverness and resilience in overcoming obstacles.
Both stories are filled with adventure and larger-than-life characters. But how accurate are they? Do they reflect the Mycenaean age, or are they more like creative interpretations of a distant past?
That's a question scholars are still debating. Some believe Homer's epics offer glimpses into Mycenaean society, while others think they reflect the values and ideals of the later period when they were written down.
So the mysteries of history continue.
Yeah.
But regardless of their historical accuracy, Homer's poems clearly had a profound impact on Greek culture.
Absolutely. They instilled heroic ideals, aristocratic values, and a certain vision of women's roles that resonated throughout Greek society.
So they weren't just entertaining stories, they were shaping the very fabric of Greek culture. Was Homer the only influential poet of this era?
Well, another important poet was Hesiod. His works Theogony and Works and Days offer a different perspective. Theogony dives into the origin of the Greek gods, explaining their creation and the often violent power struggles that shape their relationship.
He sounds a bit like a divine soap opera, but with much higher stakes.
You could say that. And Works and Days gives a more down-to-earth perspective focusing on practical aspects of human life, like farming and labor. But even in these everyday activities, the gods are always watching, judging human actions, and dispensing rewards or punishments.
So even in practical matters, the gods played a central role. Now, during this Dark Age, we also see the emergence of a political structure that would come to define ancient Greece, the polis. Why was this so significant?
Well, the polis, or city-state, became the fundamental political unit in ancient Greece. It wasn't just a city, it included the surrounding countryside, forming a self-governing community with its own laws, customs, and identity.
So like a mini-nation within itself.
Exactly. And each polis had its own distinct character and way of life. At the heart of the polis were two key spaces: the Acropolis, a fortified hilltop where temples and palaces were located, and the Agora, a public square that served as a marketplace and a center for political and social life.
So the Acropolis was the sacred and political heart, while the Agora was where the action happened. The debates, the deals, maybe even some gossip. But did all these polis coexist peacefully?
Not always. Rivalry and conflict between polis were quite common. They competed for resources, territory, and influence, often leading to warfare. This tension and competition would become a recurring theme in Greek history.
So the seeds of future conflicts were already being sown. As the Greeks emerged from the Dark Age, they entered a new era, the world of the Greek city-states, from around 750 to 500 BCE. What changes did this new era bring?
Well, for one, we see the rise of the hoplites, heavily armed citizen soldiers who formed the backbone of Greek armies.
Okay, tell us more about these hoplites. What made them so effective?
Hoplites were armed with large, round shields, long spears, and often wore bronze armor. Their key tactic was the phalanx formation, a tightly packed line of soldiers presenting a wall of shields and spears to the enemy. It was incredibly effective and made Greek armies a force to be reckoned with.
It sounds intimidating. So hoplites were essentially citizen militia protecting their polis.
Exactly, and as these city-states developed, different forms of government began to emerge.
Right, because it wasn't all about democracy in ancient Greece, was it?
Not at all. While Athenian democracy is famous, it wasn't the only system. We also see monarchies ruled by kings, tyrannies, where a single individual seized power, often promising to address the concerns of the common people, and oligarchies, where a small group of wealthy citizens held the reins of power.
So a real mix of political systems.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Athenian democracy. What made it so unique, even with its limitations?
Athenian democracy, though limited to free adult men, gave citizens a direct voice in government. Citizens themselves participated in assemblies, debated laws, and voted on crucial decisions.
That was a radical idea for its time. What were the key institutions of this Athenian government?
Two important bodies played crucial roles: the Boule, a council of 500 citizens chosen by lot, which proposed laws and oversaw the day-to-day affairs of the city, and the Ecclesia, the assembly of all male citizens, which had the final say on legislation.
So the bull was like a steering committee, and the ecclesia was the town hall meeting where everyone got to have their say.
That's a good analogy. Now, while the Greeks were experimenting with different forms of government, they weren't just staying put in their city-states. They were also venturing out and establishing colonies across the Mediterranean.
Right. I always forget how far the Greeks spread their influence. What drove this colonization frenzy?
Several factors were at play. Population growth put a strain on resources, leading to competition for land and food. Political tensions within the polis also pushed some people to seek new opportunities elsewhere.
So a combination of push and pull factors driving people to new horizons.
Exactly. And the extent of their colonization was remarkable. We find Greek settlements in Sicily, Italy, Sardinia, France, Spain, and even as far as the Canary Islands.
Talk about a cultural explosion. What impact did this Greek diaspora have on the Mediterranean?
It was profound. These colonies became centers of trade, agriculture, and cultural exchange. They spread Greek language ideas and customs throughout the region, shaping the development of Western civilization in lasting ways.
Okay, let's zoom back in on the Greek mainland. We've talked about the rise of different city-states, but two in particular stand out: Sparta and Athens. Tell us about Sparta, the legendary warrior society.
Sparta was unique in its approach to problem solving they conquered. Faced with overpopulation and land shortages, they went to war with their neighbors, conquering the region of Messenia.
Not exactly a peaceful solution. What happened to the Messenians after Sparta conquered them?
The Spartans turned them into helots, essentially state-owned slaves who worked the land. They also subjugated the surrounding populations known as Perioikoi, who were free but had no political rights.
Sounds like a pretty rigid social hierarchy. Did this system create tensions within Spartan society itself?
Absolutely. Around 650 BCE, Sparta faced a massive helot revolt known as the Second Messenian War, which took them decades to put down.
A slave revolt in ancient Sparta. What impact did this have on Spartan society?
It created internal divisions and forced the Spartans to double down on their militaristic system. They realized they needed to maintain strict control and military dominance to prevent further uprisings.
So Sparta's response to internal and external pressure was to become even more militaristic. What was life like for the average Spartan?
Spartan society was structured around the suppression of individuality and a relentless focus on military training. Boys began rigorous physical and military training at the age of 7, and they were expected to serve in the army until the age of 60.
That's an intense commitment to the warrior lifestyle. What about Spartan women? Did they have any role in this militarized society?
Spartan women had a surprisingly unique role compared to women in other Greek city-states. They were encouraged to be physically fit and strong, as it was believed to contribute to the birth of healthy children. They also had more freedom and control over property than their counterparts elsewhere.
So Spartan women were tough, but it sounds like their freedom was still tied to their role in supporting the militaristic system.
That's an important point. While they had more autonomy in some ways, their lives were still defined by the needs of the Spartan state.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about Athens, a city-state known for its very different approach to social and political challenges.
In contrast to Sparta's militaristic focus, Athens developed a system of democracy extending political rights to all free male citizens. Their journey towards democracy was gradual, marked by reforms, power struggles, and even a period of tyranny.
So it wasn't a straight path to democracy. Who were some of the key figures in shaping Athenian democracy?
Well, we have Draco, who established a harsh law code in 621 BCE. Then there's Solon, an aristocratic poet who gained the trust of the common people and introduced reforms aimed at reducing social inequalities. Pisistratus, a tyrant who seized power, also played a role, ironically promoting some democratic ideas while consolidating his own control.
So even a tyrant could contribute to the development of democracy. That's interesting.
History is full of those unexpected twists, but the figure who really solidified Athenian democracy was Cleisthenes. He introduced reforms that gave more power to the people, creating a system where all male citizens had a voice.
So Cleisthenes is considered the father of Athenian democracy.
You could say that he restructured Athenian society and politics, laying the foundation for a system that would profoundly impact not only Greece, but Western civilization as a whole.
Now we're about to enter what's considered the classical period of Greece from around 500 to 338 BCE, and it kicks off with a bang. The Persian Wars. Set the stage for us. Who were the Persians and how did they get tangled up with the Greeks?
The Persian Empire was a massive power in the ancient world, stretching from Egypt to India. They had gradually expanded their control westward, coming into contact with the Greek city-states along the coast of Asia Minor.
Sounds like a collision course waiting to happen.
Exactly. And in 499 BCE, the Greeks living in Ionia, a region under Persian rule, rebelled against their overlords with the support of Athens.
So Athens was poking the bear, so to speak. What was the Persian response?
The Persians, not surprisingly, decided to retaliate. They launched a massive invasion of Greece, aiming to punish Athens and bring those rebellious Greeks to heel.
The stakes were high. How did this clash of civilizations play out?
The first major encounter was the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. The Athenians, against all odds, defeated the larger Persian force. This victory became legendary and a symbol of Greek resilience.
I can only imagine the celebrations back in Athens. Did this victory deter the Persians?
Not for long. 10 years later, under King Xerxes, the Persians returned with an even larger force determined to conquer Greece once and for all.
Round 2. What were some of the key battles in this second Persian invasion?
Perhaps the most famous is the Battle of Thermopylae, where a small force of Spartans and other Greeks, led by King Leonidas, held off the massive Persian army for days.
The Spartans always ready to fight to the death, but didn't they ultimately lose that battle?
They did, but their heroic sacrifice bought time for the other Greek forces to prepare.
A strategic defeat, then, that contributed to the larger victory. What happened next?
Despite their victory at Thermopylae, the Persians faced further setbacks. The Athenian navy, led by Themistocles, crushed the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis.
A turning point in the war.
Absolutely. And the following year, the Greeks decisively defeated the Persian army at the Battle of Plataea, effectively ending the invasion.
It's like a David versus Goliath story. What was the significance of this Greek victory on the world stage?
It was monumental. It ensured the independence of the Greek city-states, allowing their unique culture and political systems to flourish. It also marked a turning point in the balance of power in the ancient world.
A pivotal moment, for sure.
Yeah.
How do we know so much about these epic wars?
We have Herodotus to thank. He was a Greek historian who lived during this period, often called the father of history. He traveled extensively collecting accounts of the Persian Wars and writing what's considered the first true work of history in Western literature.
Without Herodotus, our understanding of this crucial period would be much dimmer. So the Greeks had repelled the Persian threat, but did they all live happily ever after in peace and harmony?
Unfortunately not. As we'll see, victory in the Persian Wars had some unforeseen consequences, leading to new power struggles and eventually a devastating conflict between the Greeks themselves. So after the Persian Wars, Athens emerges as this dominant naval power in the Aegean Sea. They formed the Delian League, supposedly to protect Greece from further Persian aggression, but it kind of quickly turned into more of an Athenian empire.
So from defending Greece to ruling it, power can be pretty seductive. How did this happen?
Well, the Athenians began treating their allies more like subjects. They demanded tribute and used the League's treasury for their own purposes.
Classic case of mission creep. How did the other Greek city-states react to this power grab?
Not well. There were several revolts, but Athens managed to suppress them, tightening their control over the Aegean.
Athens was becoming a bully on the block.
Yeah.
Was there any particular leader who embodied this Athenian ambition?
It was especially evident under Pericles.
Pericles, a name that resonates through history. Remind us who he was in his role in this era.
Well, Pericles was a brilliant statesman, orator, and general who guided Athenian policy for decades during the 5th century BCE. He was a champion of democracy and oversaw this period of incredible cultural and intellectual flourishing in Athens.
Ah, the golden age of Athens.
But it sounds like Pericles also had a bit of an imperialistic streak.
He certainly wasn't afraid to assert Athenian power. He saw Athens as the leader of the Greek world and pursued an aggressive foreign policy, particularly towards Sparta and its allies.
So tension was building between these two powerful city-states. What was the breaking point?
There were a few skirmishes and proxy wars in the decades after the Persian Wars, but the real showdown came in 431 BCE with the start of the Peloponnesian War.
This is it, the Clash of the Titans. Tell us about this epic conflict.
The Peloponnesian War was this brutal and lengthy struggle between Athens and its empire against Sparta and its allies. It lasted for nearly 3 decades and had devastating consequences for everyone involved.
27 years of warfare. That's longer than some empires even exist. What were some of the key moments in this long and bloody conflict? Early in the war, Athens was struck by this devastating plague that killed thousands, including Pericles himself. It was a massive blow to Athenian morale and leadership.
A plague on top of everything else. Talk about a double whammy.
It was a turning point for sure. There was a brief period of peace known as the Peace of Naissus, but it didn't last, and the fighting resumed with even greater ferocity.
So, no happy ending in sight. What else marked this brutal conflict?
One particularly brutal episode was the Athenian conquest of the island of Melos in 416 BCE. The Melians, who had tried to remain neutral in the conflict, were ruthlessly punished by the Athenians. They killed all the men of military age and sold the women and children into slavery.
That's horrific. It seems the Athenians became the very tyrants they had once opposed.
It's a tragic example of how even a democracy under extreme pressure can commit terrible acts.
How did this epic struggle finally end?
After years of grueling warfare, Sparta, with the help of its allies and financial support from Persia, finally defeated Athens in 404 BCE. The Athenian fleet was destroyed, their walls torn down, and their empire dismantled.
A crushing defeat for Athens. What were the lasting effects of this war?
The Peloponnesian War left Greece weakened and divided. It marked the end of the Golden Age of Athens and ushered in a period of instability and decline. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta had consumed them both, leaving them vulnerable to outside forces.
A tragic but familiar tale of self-destruction through internal conflict. But even with all the wars and power struggles, the classical period of Greece is renowned for incredible cultural achievements. Let's shift gears and explore the world beyond the battlefield. What was daily life like for the average person in ancient Greece?
Well, life varied greatly depending on your social status, gender, and whether you lived in a bustling city like Athens or a rural community. But we can get a glimpse into their world by looking at their homes, their work, and their social structures.
Let's take a peek behind the curtain. What was it like inside a typical Greek household?
Most Greek homes were relatively modest, built around a central courtyard. Men were generally responsible for working outside the home as farmers, craftsmen, or merchants, while women managed the household, raising children, weaving cloth, and preparing food.
So a fairly traditional division of labor. What about the role of slavery in Greek society?
Unfortunately, slavery was a pervasive institution in ancient Greece. Slaves performed a wide range of tasks, from domestic service to skilled labor.
It's hard to reconcile such a brilliant civilization with the reality of widespread slavery. Were there any opportunities for slaves to gain their freedom?
In some cases, yes, slaves who worked as skilled laborers and earned wages could sometimes purchase their freedom. But for the vast majority, slavery was a life sentence.
A stark reminder of the darker side of this otherwise brilliant civilization. But let's focus on those brilliant achievements for a moment. We often hear about the Golden Age of Athens, what made it so golden.
Under Pericles' leadership, Athens experienced this surge of artistic, intellectual, and architectural creativity. He initiated ambitious building programs, particularly on the Acropolis, transforming it into this symbol of Athenian power and cultural achievement.
Okay, picture this. We're standing on the Acropolis overlooking Athens. What architectural wonders would we be marveling at?
You'd be surrounded by breathtaking structures. The Propylaea, a monumental gateway, would welcome you to this sacred precinct. Then there's the Temple of Athena Nike, a delicate and elegant structure celebrating the goddess of victory.
And of course, the crown jewel, the Parthenon.
Ah, the Parthenon, a masterpiece of Doric architecture dedicated to Athena, the patron goddess of Athens. Its harmonious proportions, intricate sculptures, and sheer grandeur made it a wonder of the ancient world.
It's incredible to think those structures have stood for over 2,000 years.
They are truly a testament to the skill and artistry of the ancient Greeks.
This golden age wasn't just about architecture, was it? Tell us about the explosion of creativity in other art forms like theater.
Greek drama was another defining feature of this era. It was deeply connected to religious festivals, particularly those honoring Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry.
So theater was rooted in religious ritual.
Exactly. And the Greeks developed three main genres of drama, tragedy, comedy, and satyr plays, which were often humorous and satirical.
Give us a crash course in Greek theater. Who were some of the big names of Athenian drama?
Well, we have Aeschylus, known for his powerful tragedies like the Oresteia, exploring themes of fate, justice, and revenge. Then there's Sophocles, the author of Oedipus Rex, a classic tragedy about a king who unknowingly fulfills a prophecy that leads to his downfall.
Greek tragedies often seem to involve a tragic flaw or unavoidable fate. What about comedy? Were the Greeks all doom and gloom?
Not at all. They also had a sharp wit and a love for satire. Aristophanes, the master of Athenian comedy, used his plays to poke fun at politicians, philosophers, and even the gods themselves.
So they weren't afraid to make fun of authority. What were his plays like?
Aristophanes' plays, like Lysistra and The Birds, are full of hilarious social commentary and biting satire, reflecting the vibrancy of Athenian democracy.
It's fascinating how these plays offer a window into the social and political debates of their time. We've covered architecture, sculpture, and theater. What else should we add to our Athenian cultural tour?
We can't forget about the role of religion in ancient Greek life. The Greeks were polytheistic, believing in a multitude of gods and goddesses who controlled various aspects of human existence.
Right, the Greek pantheon is full of interesting characters. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Aphrodite remind us of their basic roles.
Zeus, of course, was the king of the gods, ruling from Mount Olympus. Hera, his wife, was the goddess of marriage and family. Poseidon ruled the seas, while Aphrodite was the goddess of love and beauty. There were many others, each with their own domains and personalities.
Sounds like the gods were almost like extended family members, both revered and feared.
Mm.
Did the Greeks have sacred texts or doctrines like other religions?
Not in the same way we see in monotheistic religions. Greek religion was more about rituals and practices than strict adherence to doctrines. They believed in honoring the gods through sacrifices, festivals, and prayers, seeking their favor and avoiding their wrath.
So a more pragmatic approach to religion. What about the concept of heroes in Greek mythology?
Absolutely. Heroes like Heracles were legendary figures, often the offspring of a god and a mortal who performed extraordinary feats and were revered for their courage, strength, and cunning.
So demigods with superhuman abilities. They must have been inspiring figures for the ancient Greeks.
They were. They embodied the ideals of bravery, perseverance, and devotion to duty. Their stories were passed down through generations, serving as moral exemplars and sources of national pride.
Okay, we've explored daily life, artistic achievements, and religious beliefs. But this period is also known for a remarkable explosion of philosophical thought. Let's dive into the world of Greek philosophy, starting with one of its most enigmatic figures, Socrates.
Socrates was a true revolutionary in the world of ideas. He didn't leave behind any written works, so we know about him primarily through the accounts of his students, particularly Plato.
A philosopher who didn't write anything. That's unusual. How did he spread his ideas?
Through dialogue and debate, he wandered the streets of Athens, engaging people in conversations, challenging their assumptions, and provoking them to think critically about their beliefs and values.
A real street philosopher, bringing philosophy to the people. Tell us about his famous method.
It's called the Socratic method. It involves a series of questions designed to expose contradictions in people's thinking and lead them to a deeper understanding of the subject at hand.
It sounds like a great way to encourage people to think for themselves. But didn't his constant questioning get him into trouble?
It did. In 399 BCE, he was put on trial by the Athenian authorities for corrupting the youth and impiety. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by drinking hemlock.
What a tragic end for a man dedicated to pursuing truth and wisdom. What were some of Socrates' key teachings?
He believed that true knowledge comes from within, through self-examination and critical thinking. He famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." He also emphasized the importance of virtue and living a moral life even in the face of adversity.
Powerful ideas that still resonate today. What happened to Socrates' legacy after his death? Did his followers abandon his teachings?
Not at all. His most famous student, Plato, ensured his ideas would continue to inspire generations of thinkers.
Tell us about Plato. How did he build upon Socrates' legacy?
Plato was deeply influenced by Socrates' teachings, but he also developed his own unique philosophical system. He founded the Academy in Athens, considered by many to be the first university in the Western world. There, he taught and wrote extensively on a wide range of topics.
So he took the Socratic method to the next level, creating a space for rigorous intellectual inquiry.
Exactly. And one of Plato's most influential ideas was his theory of forms. He argued that the physical world we experience with our senses is merely a shadow of a higher realm of perfect eternal forms.
Explain these forms for us. What are they?
Imagine a perfect circle. You can draw a circle on a piece of paper, but it will never be truly perfect. There will always be slight imperfections. But the idea of a perfect circle, the form of a circle, exists in a realm beyond our senses.
So the forms are like blueprints for the imperfect things we see in the physical world.
That's one way to think about it. Plato believed that through reason and contemplation, we can access this realm of forms and gain true knowledge.
It's like trying to see the matrix. What other ideas did Plato explore in his writings?
He wrote extensively about justice, ethics, politics, and even the nature of reality itself. His most famous work is The Republic, in which he outlines his vision of an ideal state ruled by philosopher kings.
A society led by philosophers. Now that's a radical idea. Did Plato have any thoughts on democracy, given that he lived in Athens?
He was actually quite critical of Athenian democracy. He saw it as chaotic and susceptible to manipulation by demagogues.
Interesting. So even in the birthplace of democracy, there were dissenting voices. We've got Socrates the questioner and Plato the idealist. Who else should we add to our Greek Philosophical Hall of Fame?
We can't leave out Aristotle. He was a student of Plato, but he challenged and expanded upon his teacher's ideas, becoming one of the most influential thinkers in Western history.
Okay, give us the Aristotle lowdown. What made him so special?
Aristotle was a polymath, a master of many disciplines. He made significant contributions to logic, ethics, politics, physics, biology, and even theater.
Wow, a true Renaissance man before the Renaissance.
Exactly. He believed in the power of observation and empirical evidence, emphasizing the importance of studying the natural world to understand its principles.
So a more hands-on approach to knowledge than Plato's focus on abstract forms.
You could say that while Plato looked to the heavens for truth, Aristotle kept his feet firmly planted on the ground.
What were some of his key insights?
In his work Politics, he analyzed different forms of government, arguing that the best system balances the interests of different classes in society. He also developed a system of logic that's still used today, emphasizing the importance of clear reasoning and argumentation.
So he laid the groundwork for the scientific method and logical thinking.
He certainly played a crucial role in shaping Western intellectual traditions.
We've covered the rise of Greek civilization, their epic wars, their cultural achievements, and even delved into the world of their groundbreaking philosophers. But there's one more chapter in our ancient Greek saga, the rise of Alexander the Great and the spread of Hellenism. Alexander, he inherited the throne at just 20 years old. And what does he do? Immediately sets his sights on the vast Persian Empire.
And his conquests were unbelievably fast. Think about it. Crossing into Persia in 334 BCE. Then just a few years later, conquering Egypt in 332 BCE, even being declared pharaoh. And then, just to top it off, he decisively defeats the Persians at Gaugamela in 331 BCE.
Wow. It's most hard to keep up with the speed of all that.
Right, and he didn't stop there.
Oh no, he burned Persepolis, relentlessly pursued Darius III, and his ultimate goal, conquering all of Asia, the entire continent.
It's truly mind-boggling when you think about the sheer scale of his ambition. Conquering Persia, that wasn't enough. He wanted it all.
Talk about ambition. But as we all know, even Alexander's ambition couldn't conquer, well, mortality.
That's right, he died at just 32 years old.
Leaving behind a legacy that's still debated today.
It is interesting, isn't it, how opinions about him were divided even in his own time. Later Romans and Greeks, they admired him, but a lot of his contemporaries, they saw him as a tyrant. But whatever your perspective, there's no denying his impact on history.
Absolutely. And one of the most significant impacts was how his vast empire was divided after his death. His generals, they fought amongst themselves. And ultimately, the empire was split into three powerful kingdoms: the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire, stretching all the way from Asia Minor to India, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia.
A huge turning point, this division. And you know what it led to? The spread of Greek culture, what we call Hellenization, this diffusion of Greek ideas, language, customs, way beyond the borders of Greece itself.
It's fascinating to think about. And it was fueled, at least in part, by the cities and military colonies Alexander strategically established throughout his campaigns. These cities, they weren't just centers of control. They were hubs where Greek and local traditions blended together.
He was essentially laying the groundwork for a massive cultural exchange that would shape the entire ancient world. These Hellenistic cities, they became melting pots, different cultures coming together. Though Greek influence, that was definitely the most prominent.
Makes sense. So let's talk about life in these Hellenistic cities. One thing that stands out is the increased social and physical mobility of women, a big contrast to traditional Greek society. Women in these cities, they had more opportunities for education, commerce, even intellectual pursuits.
It's true. We see more evidence of women becoming literate, engaging in trade, entering professions that were usually dominated by men. It's a glimpse into how cultural exchange can lead to social change, sometimes in unexpected ways.
It is. But there's also another side to this urban life, right? You had all these Greek soldiers and administrators constantly on the move, seeking personal gain over loyalty to any particular kingdom. That must have created a very dynamic, kind of unpredictable environment.
Oh, absolutely. Constant movement, the need for a common language for all these people from different places, well, it led to the rise of what we call Koine Greek. It literally means common Greek. And it became the lingua franca of the entire Hellenistic world, a shared language, facilitating trade, governance, cultural exchange across vast distances.
So even though Alexander's empire fractured, the seeds of a common Greek culture were planted, thanks in part to Koine Greek. But it's important to remember that Hellenization, it wasn't a uniform process.
Right.
It varied from region to region, from kingdom to kingdom.
You're absolutely right. The strongest Greek influence, that was in the urban centers. Rural areas, they held on to their own traditions and customs more tightly.
Yeah.
It was really a complex tapestry of cultural blending.
A tapestry, I like that. So for example, you have the Ptolemies in Egypt. They were focused on extracting resources from the native Egyptian population, but they actually limited the spread of Greek culture. Seems like they were more interested in economic exploitation than cultural exchange.
Yeah, it does seem that way. But then you have the Seleucids. They took a much more active approach. They promoted Hellenism through establishing cities, military colonies. They were intentionally extending Greek influence even into more rural areas.
Interesting. So even within this Hellenistic world, you see different approaches to cultural interaction. But despite those differences, there are some amazing examples of cultural exchange happening across boundaries.
Yeah.
One that really struck me was the story of Asoka, the Buddhist ruler of the Mauryan Empire in India.
Ahsoka. Oh, yes, a fascinating figure. What about him intrigued you?
Well, around 269 to 233 BCE, he did something pretty remarkable. He had his laws translated into Greek. For the Greek-speaking population living in parts of his empire, that shows you that even rulers with very different belief systems, they recognize the importance of cultural understanding.
It absolutely does. It's a real testament to the interconnectedness of the Hellenistic world. And speaking of connecting cultures and knowledge, we can't forget about the Great Library of Alexandria.
Yes, the Great Library,
Mhm.
a legendary place. It housed hundreds of thousands of Greek texts, attracting scholars from all over the world. It wasn't just a library, it was a symbol of the intellectual and cultural vibrancy of the entire Hellenistic era.
Imagine the knowledge contained within those walls. It really represented the preservation, the celebration of Greek knowledge and thought, attracting minds from across the known world to study, to debate, to contribute to a growing body of human understanding.
It's really incredible to think about the legacy of ancient Greece. It's a powerful reminder that we're all part of this larger historical narrative, a story that's still unfolding. And by understanding the past, maybe, just maybe, we can gain a better understanding of ourselves and the world we live in today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.